I'm pleased to be joined today by Joe Selby, who is the Executive Director of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Joe, thanks for joining me. 2012 has been a busy year for you and the board and all of the staff at PCORI. And if you could, just sum up the 2012 and what some of the highlights have been of this year.
Yeah, it has been a busy year, and I think point first to the delivery, the vetting by the public of PCORI's national priorities for research and its first research agenda. The next big item was the release of the draft report of the methodology committee in May, followed by a summer of vetting with the public, digesting all that comment, and in November of this year, our board adopted the revised first version of a set of standards for conducting patient-centered outcomes research. The next is we've really built and put into operation what we call an engagement infrastructure. So a series of meetings, series of relationships, culminating in the creation of advisory panels linked to each of our priorities. Multi-stakeholder advisory panels that will help PCORI identify and prioritize the questions we're going to fund. So those are some of the major accomplishments of this year.
As you now look forward into 2013 and beyond, we can anticipate the research coming in, but what else? What are the other things in your target zone for 2013?
Well, I think what you'll see is as we build these advisory panels that are linked to each of the priorities, and we begin considering questions that come to us via our website, that come to us when we go to meetings, that come to us through guideline development efforts or the products of systematic reviews. As we consider those questions and prioritize them, you're going to see PCORI begin to produce a more focused or targeted research agenda. I don't think you're ever going to see PCORI say, diabetes is our #1 condition and cancer is #2 and heart disease is #3. We're not going to say that. But we are going to say this type of research is particularly important to patients, and PCORI is going to put an extra focus on this. So I think by the end of 2013, you'll know not only that PCORI is funding research, but you'll know some particular areas, some particular directions that PCORI has selected in collaboration with patients, patient organizations, clinicians, and other stakeholders.
So patient-centeredness is not only in the name of the organization, Joe, but it's clearly something that you have thought a lot about and are designing your research around. Can you describe what it means, patient-centeredness in your lexicon, and how you get to it?
Patient-centeredness means very simply, is this a question that patients tell us is important to them? Is this a question that will help patients make decisions? And secondly, as we craft the question and the research to answer the question, are we considering the outcomes that are important to patients? So oftentimes it's outcomes that patients are really worried about. They're not so worried about, is it this treatment or that treatment? It's what's going to happen to me. So it remains to be seen exactly how much emphasis winds up getting put on outcomes versus the treatments. But that's our definition. The question matters to patients, and the outcomes that we're studying include all the outcomes that patients say are important. That's our working definition. The way that we get there is, as I've said, by being engaged with patients as we generate and prioritize the questions, as we decide what we're going to fund, as we review the applications, and as we conduct the research. So we don't think that we can come up with these patient-centered questions in a vacuum. We need patients there as we come up with the questions. And we really don't think that the research can be conducted and stay true to a patient-centered focus without having patients involved as the research gets done.
You mentioned dissemination and the importance of disseminating research results back out. There have to be challenges in disseminating research that goes to academics and clinicians who are going to read this at one level, and then patients and family caregivers who are going to look at it at a different level. How do you cross that chasm?
The first is whether the question is important to clinicians or payers or patients. And we don't think that every question we study is going to spring initially from the patient community. We completely believe that clinicians come up with important questions, which when discussed with patients, are recognized by patients to be very important. So we think that clinicians are in a position to see a lot of critical choices that have to get made, and as they discuss those questions with patients, many of them will be recognized by patients as important. We think that that payers face real dilemmas and real choices, and we think that when they sit down and share those questions with patients, patients will agree, we need an answer to some of these questions. And we think industry faces a lot of questions in crafting their research, many of which will resonate with patients. So we think questions will come from all quarters, but the questions we'll fund are questions that in the end patients say are important. We're betting that we can get a head start on dissemination if we've had patients and clinicians, patient organizations, clinician organizations involved with us from early on. So we're really very interested in building and maintaining and strengthening those relationships so that as we conduct research, we have a community waiting for the answers. We think that gives you a real head start in getting the results disseminated when the results come out and when we agree that they're useful for dissemination.
So PCORI is a unique entity. It's not a governmental agency. It's not purely private. It was created in the Affordable Care Act. You have folks on Capitol Hill who are watching what PCORI is doing. They have very specific deadlines for you along the way. How have you been managing that, and how do these deadlines on the horizon impact you?
We definitely have our eyes locked on the horizon in terms of the legislation builds in several evaluation points. In 2014, most likely, the Government Accountability Office will launch a investigation or an audit of exactly how well PCORI is following the letter and the intent of the legislation. So that's 2014, 2015, kind of about 5 years out. In 2017, there will be an 8-year evaluation, and that evaluation is actually linked to a decision by Congress on whether to reauthorize PCORI, which, if it's not reauthorized, comes to an abrupt halt in September of 2019. And then on out, there's a GAO audit 5 yearly, so 2014, and then you'd expect the next one 2019, 2020. Those will be exquisitely linked not only to the legislation but also to our strategic plan, to our own goals. So we are very busy identifying our explicit goals, and the goals have to take into account exactly what's said in the legislation and the realities of the length of time it takes to conduct and disseminate high-quality research. So we'll have a set of goals that we can be held accountable to.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Joe. And we appreciate Joe Selby, the Executive Director of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, for joining us today and all the thoughts that you've provided. So thanks.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure.